Hey, what's up guys, Impulse7 here, and today I'm bringing you guys another video. In this video, I'm going to be ranking every single FNAF game. And this is also going to be including FNAF World, which is of course a FNAF game, but also Curse of Dreadbear and Ruin, because while they are DLCs, they're basically big enough to be their own games, right? Today is actually the 9-year anniversary of the first 5 Nights at Freddy's games, so what better time to rank all the FNAF games than right now? So since today is FNAF's 9-year anniversary, it's possible that we'll get some news today, but I'm recording this the night before, so I don't know if we'll actually get any news yet, and if we do, I'll do a video. It's also possible that we'll get a game theory today, and if so, then I'll react to that, but I have no idea if we're gonna get anything else today. This might be my only upload, there might be 2 uploads, there might be 3, we will have to find out. Starting off, the 5 Nights at Freddy's game ranking is of course FNAF 1, the game that came out 9 years ago today. That's wild to think about. I was only 6 when this game came out. I was about to turn 7 when this game came out. Now I'm about to turn 16. I remember watching my brother play FNAF 1 back when it first came out, or maybe some time after, and he got jump scared and I was terrified of it, so I never touched it ever again. Sometimes I watched like popular MMOs and his like FNAF Minecraft mod reviews and stuff like that, or the challenge games, but I never actually played or watched people play FNAF until around late 2018 or early 2019, where one of my friends actually got me into FNAF. And the first game that I played was actually FNAF 3. Not 1 or 2, and it was just on like this really random sketchy like website with a bunch of random games, and I think it was just like the demo of FNAF 3, or it was like a pirated version of it. I have no idea, but it was just I played it, and it was pretty fun. I wasn't very good at it though. But when I got into FNAF, I started watching a lot of people play the games. Like first I watched, I think, Markiplier or popular MMOs. I hadn't watched Markiplier until I started getting into FNAF. I watched Markiplier or popular MMOs, and I eventually watched both, and then I started watching Jacksepticeye too, and these were the introductions to Markiplier and Jacksepticeye for me. So all their FNAF videos are really important to me just because they're what got me into their channels, and now I love their channels for stuff other than just FNAF. Obviously I love their FNAF stuff too, and whenever a new game comes out, I of course watch their FNAF videos, and I've watched all the Ruin videos from both of them. And I'm really excited for whenever Help 1 and 2 comes out to see what their reactions will be to that. But FNAF 1 is just a really important game, not only because of like how revolutionary it was for like horror. I mean, it wasn't that revolutionary, but it was like it changed the game in some ways and inspired other games, and it had influences on games probably like Bendy the Ink Machine and eventually Poppy Playtime, then Garden of Banban, which copied Poppy Playtime, which copied Bendy the Ink Machine, which copied FNAF, or didn't copy FNAF, but like they're not really copies of each other. They're just like, they all take inspiration from each other, including FNAF. Like, Bendy and the Ink Machine was definitely inspired in some ways by FNAF. That doesn't mean it was copied by it at all, and I love Bendy and the Ink Machine and Poppy Playtime, not Garden of Banban though, but just because FNAF inspired so many really cool horror games, it's really important to a lot of people. And it's important because it created this big community, which I'm now a part of, and while I wasn't there from the very beginning, when I eventually became a part of the community, it became really important to me too. Especially because it's basically made my entire channel. And while I don't always do FNAF content, and well, I mostly do, but I don't always do FNAF content. I do some other stuff sometimes, and when stuff like Marvel Spider-Man 2 comes out, I'm gonna be dropping everything just to play that. But I wouldn't be able to have this channel at all, and it wouldn't be in the place that it is if it weren't for FNAF. So it's just a really special game, and that's because it's the first game. If it weren't for the first one, we'd have nothing else beyond it, obviously. And it's a good thing that it did really well, because otherwise we would have gotten no Scott Cawthon games ever again. This one game basically solidified Scott Cawthon's career as a game developer. Like, obviously he made games before, but this was like his big break, basically. So it's just really important that this game exists, and I'm really glad it does. As a game itself, it's also really good. Like, not even just because of nostalgia or just bias because it was the first game. it's actually a really good game. I wouldn't say it's like S tier in terms of gameplay. It would probably be S tier in terms of like everything that came after, but like the gameplay itself and the nostalgia factor and everything surrounding that, it is A tier. The quality of what comes after is not necessarily dependent on this first game, but the existence of those things that came after are of course dependent. So some other things in the future are better, but the first game will always hold a special place, and I'm sure everybody in this community's hearts. So it's gonna go in A tier for me. A lot more recently, I've seen a lot more flack being thrown at FNAF 2, and honestly, I don't really know why. I love FNAF 2. It basically builds upon everything that the first game did well, except really the horror. I think the first game was way better in horror, but the second game is way better in terms of just the gameplay in general. I love the mask mechanic, and the music box, while it can get annoying sometimes, I like that it makes it challenging. And FNAF 2 is definitely one of the hardest FNAF games because of Foxy, the puppet, and Toy Bonnie. And this game brought out a lot of really cool characters, some of which are some of my favorite in the entire series. Those being the puppet, of course, Withered Bonnie, Withered Freddy's up there too. He's not one of my favorites, but he is a really cool character. Characters like Shadow Freddy are really cool. There's a bunch of really cool characters that were introduced in this game, not to mention the scariest jump scare in the entire series. I don't know if that's just me, but in my opinion, the scariest jump scare in the entire series comes from Withered Foxy in this game. Just because it's so sudden, you never know when to expect it. It's of course dependent on if you flash your light enough, but if you don't flash your light for a while, you don't always know that Foxy is there. Or if you flash it but you don't do it enough, then Foxy can just jump up out of nowhere, and that's really scary when he does. I love the introduction of the mini-games too. That brought in a bunch of lore and a bunch of potential for future lore, which we ended up getting in games like FNAF 4 and FNAF 6. But FNAF 2 as a game, honestly, while a lot of people nowadays are saying that it's not as good as everybody thought it was, I think that FNAF 2 is an S tier game. FNAF 3 was the first game that Scott wanted to improve upon with the future ones. It was originally meant to be the last FNAF game, and honestly, while it wasn't that great of a game, at least in comparison to the first two, it's a good thing that it wasn't. Because if it weren't for this game not being as good as a lot of people wanted it to be, then none of the future games would have happened. FNAF 3 was meant to be the final game in the series, but because it wasn't scary enough, Scott didn't want to end the series on that. And then he made FNAF 4, which made it a lot more scary. But then FNAF 3 itself, just because even though it was the cause of of all of the games that followed, as a game itself, even though it's a good thing that it wasn't as good, that doesn't mean that it was as good. You know what I mean? I think that FNAF 3 is definitely overhated. It's not bad by any means, but it's not one of the best, in my opinion. While it was the first game that I played in this series, and it means a lot to me, I would personally put it in C tier. But it would definitely be at the top of C tier. I don't think that FNAF 3 is bad by any means. And honestly, D, E, and F tier are all probably going to be completely useless, because I don't think that there's a single FNAF game that's actually bad.
I shouldn't have said that. I should not have said that.
With that being said, we're on to my least favorite FNAF game now, FNAF 4. Now, while a lot of people love FNAF 4, I was never really the biggest fan of it. To be fair, I never played it that much, but when I played FNAF 6, I realized that it was a lot more fun than I originally thought it was. FNAF 4, on the other hand, when I did eventually play it, it never really shot up in my ranking at all. I always found FNAF 4 to be at least towards the bottom of my list. And it's okay if you guys love FNAF 4. I probably should have said at the beginning, but this list is all just my opinion. You guys don't have to agree with everything that I'm saying. I'm just here to give my personal opinions. FNAF 4, though, is a good game in terms of lore, and while it was really confusing, it's the reason that a lot of theorists exist nowadays. Because if FNAF lore never got really confusing, then there wouldn't be that much to theorize about. Because the first 3 FNAF games were kind of simple in terms of like solving the lore, and they were basically all completely solved before FNAF 4 came out. FNAF 4 was the first game to really become mysterious. And while a lot of people hate that the game was so vague, I like that it was vague, because if it wasn't, then no theorists would have been at least in the spot that they were today. I would never have had to become a theorist. I don't know if I ever would have been part of the FNAF community, because it wouldn't have branched out the way that it has. I might have ended up being a part of the FNAF community, but the series would have ended way earlier, and then it might have never gotten the attention of my friend, and then that would have never gotten the attention of me. And even if it did, I probably wouldn't be making videos on it if it had. So I think it's good that FNAF 4 wasn't as direct in terms of lore. In terms of gameplay though, while it is absolutely terrifying, one of the scariest games in the series, if not the scariest, second only maybe to Help Wanted, it's not really one of my favorites in terms of gameplay. I would also put it in C tier, but I do like FNAF 3 better. Now on to FNAF World. FNAF World is probably one of the most controversial games in the series, because it was originally made, not only was it originally developed to be made for Android for some reason, that was like a mistake that Scott talked about in his Doco interview, but it ended up being really glitchy upon launch, and Scott decided to pull the game from Steam, and then he put it on GameJolt for free. FNAF World though, while it may not have exactly been the type of FNAF game that should have come out at the time that it did, I like all the lore implications that are still relevant even to this day, and I like the gameplay of it a lot. It's not really like the most fun FNAF game like I used to think, but it is a very fun game, and I don't think it's bad by any means. It's not quite as good as the first FNAF game, by no means in fact, but I do think it's a really fun game to play when you have nothing to play and you just want to play something casually. I think FNAF World is there for you. I'd personally put FNAF World in B tier. FNAF's sister location was a big turning point in the series. It's probably one of the most unique FNAF games, but I feel like in some ways that's almost to a fault. The reason that I don't like sister location as much as some other people do is just because I don't think it's quite as fun as games like FNAF 2 and 1, and even World, honestly. While I do enjoy the game and I love the lore implications, and I love that it is unique in a lot of ways, it kind of rebooted the series while also continuing the series. You know what I mean? It's kind of like Help Wanted, where the story of the previous games is obviously still canon, but it continued the lore and the story and the gameplay itself in very different ways to how the previous games were. Sister Location, in my opinion, it belongs in B tier. It is a scary game too, in a lot of ways, and just the horror of like the ending, how we get scooped, our skeleton is taken out, and then our skin is worn as a suit by a tangle of wires, is really horrific in my opinion. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think that kept it at a C tier. I know this is definitely a hot take. A lot of people love Sister Location, say it's one of the best in the series, if not the best, but I personally wouldn't go that far. I do think it's a good game, just not quite as good as some others on the list. Halfway through, and now we're on to FNAF 6. I used to not like FNAF 6 that much. I love the simulator part, and nowadays I do really like the gameplay. It's just that back in the day, I never really did like the gameplay, and I think a lot of people still don't. The jump scares are also not that polished, they're kind of just sudden, but because they're so sudden, they do kind of get me from time to time, because they appear literally so quickly out of nowhere, and the jump scare scream is pretty good too. I really enjoy the idea behind it. It kind of takes a lot of elements from FNAF World and stuff like FNAF 6 that I really, really like, and also some from FNAF 3 in some ways that I really, really enjoyed, and I think that it put them all together in such a really good way that I would put FNAF 6 in A tier. All the minigames and stuff are really fun too, like Fruity Maze is really fun, Midnight Motorist is really fun, and I don't remember which one it was, the one that's like really similar to Foxy Fighters from FNAF World, it was really fun in my opinion. Even the basketball game is kind of fun too, but I don't think that FNAF 6 necessarily belongs in S tier. The ending was really cool, and while it may be a little bit like not as important nowadays, well, it's still important, but while it may not have worked at least exactly the way that we thought it did back then, it does make a big difference for the series, and as an ending for the series, Maybe at the time we thought it would be. Nowadays, I don't really think it would have been a really good ending, but it was such a good speech that I think we could have forgiven it being the ending. Even if a lot of people love it as an ending, I personally think it's just a little bit weird. But the speech is amazing. All the endings are really cool. Some of them are even really funny. Like the Insanity ending is both really interesting lore-wise, and it's really funny too, how like we get a lobotomy. But I just love FNAF 6. I really think that it's a great game. I think it's a little bit better than FNAF 1, and it's one of the better games in the series. But speaking of one of the better games in the series, Ultimate Custom Night is an easy S tier. Now, I really go back and forth on which one I like better, Ultimate Custom Night or FNAF 2. It's really so close. Honestly, they might even be tied. They're both S tier to me, they're both amazing games, but neither of them are quite my favorite of the entire series. Ultimate Custom Night, I like the storyline behind it, how Scott even managed to fit storyline in a game where you basically do whatever you want. And I love that not only that he was able to include lore in it, but I love being able to do whatever I want with like the customization of the game. It's really cool, and I love how it continued the kind of theme that MatPat brought up in one of his earlier theories, or not really earlier theories, but back around the time of Ultimate Custom Night, maybe in one of the timeline videos or something, that the first 5 games are like the main games of the series. FNAF World is kind of like a mini game, like some of the 8-bit mini games from stuff like FNAF 4, and it has to do with the previous games like FNAF 4 and FNAF 3, and it has to do with like those mini games from those games. Sister Location is also like a Night 5 in some ways, and it has an ending that's a lot more conclusive than the previous games. And FNAF 6 is kind of like a bonus game, giving some extra lore and some interesting like gameplay that continues from the previous ones in certain ways. But then Ultimate Custom Night is like the Night 7 from FNAF 1 and 2, where you can customize the animatronics, and it's a really cool idea to have all 7 games be like the 7 nights in a FNAF game, especially the first 2. And I just really love that idea, and I think that Ultimate Custom Night is also really fun. It's fun to build up all the characters that you're able to beat easily, and then add in more and more and more until it ends up getting really hard. I still have not even beaten 50-20 mode. Hopefully I can one day, but I just think that Ultimate Custom Night is a really, really fun game. And it's pretty hard too. It's pretty difficult, especially when you make it up to 50-20 mode. And I think that a lot of people, including myself, can have a lot of fun with it kind of whenever you want to. It's not really one of the scariest games in the series. The jump scares are a little bit underwhelming sometimes, and I've kind of gotten used to them. Even when I do get jump scared, I'm not like that scared of them. Golden Freddy's jump scare is a little bit weird because like his face isn't that big. He's just in a black void and then he's just sitting still. So that jump scares like that are not really fantastic. Some of them are cool, but they're not necessary. Like Freddy's jump scare is cool, but not all of the jump scares are exactly up to par with some of the other games like FNAF 1, even 2. Now, moving on to FNAF VR Help Wanted. Now, Help Wanted is easily my favorite FNAF game. And I don't know if this is a hot take or not. I think a lot of people have FNAF Help Wanted as their favorite FNAF game. Playing it in non-VR is really fun. I do enjoy non-VR a lot, and I play it when like every once in a while just for fun, and also Curse of Dreadbear, which we'll get to in a second. But in VR, it's a totally different experience. It's honestly probably the scariest FNAF game, especially levels like Funtime Foxy. If you die, it comes out of nowhere. You don't know when to expect it. And I love the recreations of FNAFs 1, 2, and 3. I don't think it makes any of them better, except maybe FNAF 3 is like on par with the original. But while FNAFs 1 and 2 aren't as good as they are in the originals, they're still really fun to play, and I just love the recreations. But what I really love about Help Wanted is not only Glitchtrap as a character. He's such a cool character. I love the lore, I love the tapes, I love the coins, the collectibles. It's really fun to collect the tapes and have Glitchtrap get closer to you, become more fully formed, and the pizza party minigame is just so horrifying, especially in concept. And there's one other thing in one of the games that's a lot more horrifying in concept when you know what's going to happen, and we'll get to that because it's Ruin. I'm just gonna say it's Ruin. You might know what I'm talking about if you watched my yesterday's tier list on the Security Breach characters, the Ruin characters. But Help Wanted is just, you know what happens to the kid when you go to Glitch Trap. When you follow him, you know what's gonna happen, and that's just absolutely horrifying. The other minigames too, like the Dark Rooms minigame, Vent Repair, Parts and Service. Night Terror is not as much, but the levels like Nightmare Yawn and Circus Baby, those levels are really fun. Funtime Freddy and Nightmare Fredbear are not as fun to me. I think they're okay, but the other ones, all of the other ones except maybe Funtime Foxy is, like, Funtime Foxy is terrifying. It's not as fun to me though, and I feel like it's, like, I'm kind of a wuss when I'm playing Funtime Foxy. Like, when I would wear the VR headset, I would kind of have it like this, so I could see over the top rather than actually see into them. But when I did play it once with the actual VR on, I died like instantly. I was really bad at it, and well, it was terrifying to get jump scared then. All the jump scares in Help Wanted are really good jump scares. They basically always get me unless I see it coming. Like Foxy, like you can see it coming. But that level itself, the Parts and Service Foxy, especially the Heart mode, is just really fun to play. And I just love to play it. And I love the Dark Rooms, like the Plush Trap and Nightmare Balloon Boy. We've seen them in the past, and they're like, they're done justice in the game. I think they're better than they are in FNAF 4, honestly. But it's not like one of the greatest minigames of all time. However, the other Dark Room that I have not talked about yet, probably the most controversial minigame in the entire series, Plush Baby. Honestly, I love Plush Baby. I think it's just because I've gotten really good at it. So, like, I recently played Plush Baby on non-VR, and I played the entire Plush Baby level without getting jump scared once, and without them even speaking to me once. Like, I've gotten really good at it, and I honestly find it just like a really fun minigame. Even if it's hard, even if it was hard when I first played it, it's just really fun now, and I love it. Plushkin Patch and Curse of Dreadbear is not as fun, but it's also pretty fun. The Vent Repairs, Mangle, and Ennard are also really good. I like the Ennard one better. I like how it takes you down the elevator, and if you get motion sick, then that game is like really terrifying. Ennard's level. I think those levels are all just amazing, done to perfection, honestly. And I just think that Help Wanted is the best FNAF game. Now, you guys don't have to agree with that, but it's my personal opinion, and I think it's a solid opinion. But now, let's move on to FNAF VR, Help Wanted, and the Curse of Dreadbear DLC. Curse of Dreadbear, while it's not quite as good as FNAF VR, the main game, it is still really fun. I don't like the minigames quite as much, but the minigames like Pirate Ride, Trick or Treat, and Build a Mangle are really fun to just do casually, and I do them casually every once in a while because they're just really fun to play. Plushkin Patch is pretty fun. Corn Maze is terrifying. Hallway is terrifying. The Dreadbear minigame is difficult for me. I've never been able to beat it because I'm stupid. But the Knights are pretty fun too. I like that they're like unique takes on the first game, and with the Jacko animatronics. And Dreadbear in the final level is absolutely terrifying. And I think that Curse of Dreadbear is just really fun. It's not quite as fun as the first FNAF VR, and honestly, I think I'd put it below Ultimate Custom Night and FNAF 2 as well. But it's a really good game, and I really enjoy it. Next up, okay, this is where things get controversial. FNAF Security Breach. This is, hands down, the most controversial game in the series. Except one FNAF game which I actually accidentally left out of the tier list. I'll be right back. Alright, screw Security Breach, we're talking about FNAF AR now. Alright guys, now we're going to talk about FNAF AR was really fun when it first came out, but nowadays, over time, they packed it full of so much stuff that it ended up being so buggy and just crashing all the time. So many crashes, so many bugs. It ended up just not being as fun. And then they did the gameplay update, which was supposed to like update the game to make it more quality content, but it really wasn't. In fact, it made it a lot less fun. And while there were less glitches, it just wasn't as fun as how the game was before. Giving the animatronics health bars was a really stupid decision. And while I forgot what it was called, but I think it was the Dark Circus event, like the one that was like, I think it was mixed reality. Is that what it's called? How it's like you look around and you have a completely different area inside the phone, And I think that was kind of cool, but I wasn't able to play it myself, which is the sad thing. I think it was good at first, but nowadays it's kind of been abandoned, and I don't think that it's a very good game. Probably the worst FNAF game. But like, even I did say earlier that FNAF 4 was my least favorite FNAF game, but in hindsight, FNAF AR is definitely my least favorite. It used to be even one of my favorite FNAF games, but then over time it just went way downhill, and I think it's just now it's kind of just not good. Now, FNAF Security Breach. So, like I said, this is one of the most controversial games in the series because we waited so long for it. It got delayed more than I think twice it got delayed, and it was just like it ended up not being as good as we expected it to be. There's stuff like the mazer size level, which are complete and utter bullshit. And the game itself, I always found it fun. The problem was the glitches, especially on launch. But nowadays, even some people still don't like Security Breach, whether it's because of like the actual gameplay or how it was on launch, or if there's like still bugs, because there are still bugs. And while there's not as many as there used to be, it's still pretty buggy, and I kind of proved that in some of the areas in my Security Breach stream that when I played it right before Ruin came out. I still think though that Security Breach is a really good game. I think it's really fun. It's not as good as Help Wanted, it's not as good as FNAF 2, it's not as good as Ultimate Custom Night, and it's not as good as Curse of Dreadbear. But I think it belongs in A tier, at the top of A tier. I personally really love Security Breach, and while I know a lot of people don't, I think that it is a really fun game. And I love Music Man. It introduced some of my favorite characters in the entire series, like Music Man, DJ Music Man, The Blob, 100%. Glamrock Freddy's a really good character. Maybe not like one of my favorites of all time, but a lot of the characters in the game are some of my favorites of all time, including Moon, which is a really good character too. Sun is a really good character too. Burn Trap is a cool character too. So while the game wasn't as polished as it could have been, it's not a perfect game by any means, I do think it is a good game, and while other people don't enjoy it, I personally do. So for me, it belongs in A tier. And finally, the most recent FNAF game, or technically DLC, is Ruin. Ruin, in my opinion, absolutely did not disappoint. It was so good. Not only was it really fun, not only is it really replayable, not only for like the collectibles and stuff, but just because it's really fun, but it's also just like, it's actually scary, unlike Security Breach. That's one of the biggest problems I have with Security Breach, and probably the main reason that it's not an S tier, the fact that it's just not scary at all. But Ruin, actually, it builds upon everything that Security Breach did right, and made it better, and built upon the things that Security Breach did wrong and made it actually good. And while the game can get a little bit repetitive at times with like the nodes and stuff and the conduit tasks, it's still really fun because we go throughout the Pizzaplex and we do these things in different areas, and it makes it, while it's kind of repetitive, it's still unique in its own way. I think the ending is so cool. As I talked about earlier, there's one other area of the series where you know what's going to happen, and that's what makes it so terrifying. And that's the Mimic chase sequence. The Mimic chase sequence is not really that difficult, but it's just the reason that I love it so much is because it's so horrifying, not just because it's a horror game and not just because of the jump scare, but because you know what happens when you get caught because of the Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues, where you know what's going to happen, and that just makes the whole concept really, really scary. Because if you get caught, your arms will be ripped off, your legs will be ripped off, and your head will be ripped off. It's extremely gruesome in the epilogues, and it's horrifying to think about that that's what's going to happen if you mess up in that chase sequence. If you fail, then you are going to die a horrible death. The fact that it included the Mimic, it's a little bit controversial in some areas, but the shock factor of the Mimic, like, I didn't expect it to be like that. I expected it to either be Burn Trap, I expected it to be Burn Trap inside the blob, and that's it. I expected one of those two things. I did not expect the Mimic in just its endoskeleton form. It took me so long to process it. Like, when I saw the orange eyes, I didn't put it together. When I saw the endoskeleton, I even didn't put it together. Like, it started clicking in my head. I was like, what is that? Is that the Mimic? You can see in my reaction to it in my videos or in my live stream, or both, because it's the same thing.
Get out of here! Run!
Roxy! What the hell was that? What? Was that the Mimic? When I saw the Mimic, it was such a big shock factor. All the characters are made way better. Okay, not all of them, but a lot of the characters are made way better. Gregory's not made better. He's kind of worse in this DLC. The Mimic is made a better character just because of his appearance in this DLC. While a lot of people don't like the Mimic as a character, I enjoy it, and I think its appearance in Ruin is probably its best appearance in the series just because it's so horrifying. And I love the design, I love the model, I love the lore behind the DLC. I think it's all done really well, and I think that Ruin belongs in S tier. Not above Help Wanted, but above FNAF 2, Ultimate Custom Night, Help Wanted, Curse of Dreadbear. Ruin belongs right there. But guys, that is my list of every single FNAF game ranked. Let me know in the comments what your lists are. You can even do the tier list for yourself and maybe send it in my Discord server if you want to. I will leave it in the description if I remember to. I sometimes forget, but I'll hopefully remember. And so you guys can do the tier list for yourself. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to. And I will see you all in the next video. I really need some water. My throat's kind of hurting. I've been recording for 37 minutes. 37 is a base number. And enjoy FNAF's 9-year anniversary. Bye, guys! Boo.